Hi, I'm going to introduce the book Tree Girl by Ben Michaelsen. It's set in Guatemala, which, just to refresh your memory, is in Central America. It's the country that borders Mexico. It's the farthest north in that group of countries here. The main character is Mayan, and to refresh your memory also, the Maya are the indigenous people of that area here. So it includes Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. And that term Maya is really an overarching term for lots of different cultural groups. And they have preserved, many of these groups have preserved cultural traditions from a long time ago. So they, in some cases, live somewhat independently of the country whose borders they live in now. The main character in Tree Girl is a member of the Ixchil Maya. And the story of that people is important. The book is set in the 1980s, but to really understand what's going on there historically, you have to go back at least to the 1950s. And at that time, the United States set up there was a company called the United Fruit Company, an American company, that set up shop in Guatemala, and they were really doing very well. And they were farming bananas and other tropical fruits and then shipping them to the U.S. and making a tremendous profit. And the people that were actually doing the farming were not making very much money. So at some point, this group of left-leaning students and professionals decided, hey, what if we changed the system here and the farmers actually owned the farms and were responsible for selling the product rather than having this company own everything. This was the 1950s, so that sounded an awful lot like communism, and we didn't like that in the 50s, you may remember. So the U.S. actually backed a coup to overthrow the government, or to overthrow this revolt, and back the government that existed there. And unfortunately, that led to, and you could look at it as the U.S. looking out for its own economic interests. But really, they were making a lot of money, and the U.S., it seems, was really more protecting the rights of the company than the rights of the people that were living in Guatemala at the time. So it's a controversial when you look back at what actually happened there. That unfortunately set off decades of unrest in the government there. And finally, in 1977, so that was the 1950s. In 1977, we cut off military aid to Guatemala because there were so many human rights abuses, and the central government was not powerful. It was corrupt. And then the indigenous people there, the Maya, were singled out by the government for execution and acts of brutality. And there were 200,000 people dead by the end of the Civil War. Efren Rios Montt was the dictator there. He was the head of state during the time period this book takes place, so 1982-83. And Reagan supported this government. We have to take some responsibility for that. I think the general interest was in preserving the legitimate government here, but they were not acting legitimately. And specifically, the Ixchil Maya I mentioned were singled out. So 1,771 Ixchil Maya were executed. Mott was he didn't face any consequences for a long time for that, but then miraculously in 2013 he was put on trial. I mean, this almost never happens, where you have a dictator responsible for all these acts of violence, and he's actually prosecuted for it. 10 days before he was supposed to go to prison, the case was overturned on a technicality, and then they decided, well, we'll have to repeat the whole trial. He was already quite old at that point. And then, so in 2015, they said, okay, he can stand trial on charges of genocide and crimes against humanity, but he couldn't be sentenced because he was suffering from dementia. So he was put on house arrest. There was some movement still to prosecute him further, but then he died in 2018. So did he get away with it? On some level, he did, legally speaking. He did have to go through a trial, and there was a lot in the press about this, but a lot of people feel like justice wasn't really served then. The country today, a lot's changed. They do have democratic elections. This is the current president who was elected in 2020, Alejandro Giammetti. But there's still a lot of corruption. There's still violence. There's no genocide going on, but a lot of citizens don't feel safe there. And in Guatemala, as in some other Central American countries, people are fleeing because they don't feel safe. And a lot of them are headed to the U.S. through Mexico. The Biden administration right now is, rather than building a bigger wall, is looking at some ways to really target the reason people are leaving these countries in the first place. So that's kind of where we are right now. The Ixchel Maya were targeted, it seems, specifically because they were indigenous people and may have felt as though they had, didn't feel allegiance to the central government, although it really isn't clear why he singled them out specifically. So this book, Tree Girl, is set during this revolution, this genocide. It was first published in 2004, and it's categorized as fiction, but the author interviewed survivors of this genocide, one in particular, and he's changed details to protect her identity, but there is a real person involved here. All the historical backdrop is all very accurate, and her identity has been kept a secret. Some big ideas here. Every culture or every country, the U.S. in particular, has these. It's a diverse place, as is Guatemala and other nations. So, there is a tension between unity and disunity in most modern countries here. It can be a unifying and a divisive force. There's an element of nature in this book and the role that it plays to Gabriela, the main character, and her people. And there's some other big ideas here. You'll have access to the slide pack here. So the idea here for us this quarter is to make Tree Girl a book club book, meaning that you have the option of reading it and a lot of other people will be reading it, so you'll have a chance to talk about what you're reading. If you choose to read it, it'll count as your independent reading book. So the time that we have in class to read independently, you'll read that. It'll count as your book for independent reading, and then you'll do whatever share structures and literary analysis we're doing about independent reading. Okay?